Thank you, Amy.
All right, it is 11 a.m. Tuesday, March 5th. This is a meeting of the Public Safety Committee. All members are present, so I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that the press and the public have been duly notified of the meeting in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. The first item on the agenda is citizens' comments.
Ms. Hack has been the only person to sign up.
Okay? Yep, up to the podium.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Terry Hack, and I represent the owners of Wild Dunes Resort. Thank you for your continued work on the important noise ordinance before you today. Wild Dunes Resort is committed to existing harmoniously with our valued neighbors and residents. I recognize the path towards an updated noise ordinance that appropriately addresses the needs of both the Isle Palms residents, visitors, and business community has been long and difficult. Extensive investigation and analysis have been conducted by previous safety committees here, the Planning Commission, and private businesses. As you consider the proposed noise ordinance before you, I respectfully ask that you focus on two areas. Item C, maximum decibel levels. In number 2 of item C, 75 decibel level has been reduced once again down to 70 for commercial establishments. Please return to maximum dB of 75 or greater for commercial businesses. And number 4, 55 decibel for nighttime hours has been reduced to 50 for commercial establishments. Please consider returning that maximum dB for nighttime to 55 dBs. And then the last item, item H, violations. Please consider alternative methods for measuring commercial violations and the number of repeated violations, and remove language that threatens business license removal except in extreme cases. I thank you so much for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you, and I really do appreciate everyone's efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Next item is the approval of previous meeting minutes. We have the February 13th meeting minutes in the packet. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
All right, any changes or comments? All those in favor of approving?
Aye.
Next item is old business. Discussing changes in the noise ordinance is next. I guess I can start off the conversation, and then I did some work on this. I met actually with the chief and Captain Swain and the livability officers. I met with Tom Nolan at the resort. I met with Bobby Ross at Windjammer. I met with, and I had a call with Dave Cohen, and unfortunately, I would really have liked him to have been at the meeting, but he is traveling back from a ski trip today. And I guess
And for the record,
Yeah.
David Cohen is a member of the Planning Commission who's a noise engineer.
correct. David Cohen was a member of the Planning Commission, very knowledgeable of noise ordinances, and a great resource, and we may want to even call on him further before we even move forward to the next step with this. But kind of found through my discussions with folks, and I think it's the Planning Commission did a great job of putting this together along with the previous Safety Committee. I think there's a couple items in there, and one is on these decibel levels. I think what we've tried to do is to create what started out as a residential noise ordinance. Now we've got commercial, and now even our business district, Front Beach Business District, included into this thing. And I don't know if that was the intent when we first started this, but that's where it is now. And I think that the decibel levels, if you talk to David, and there's some reasonings on this, and I think for the commercial, or for the residential, I'm fine. I think there's some dispute on where the level should be in terms of the commercial. And I just want to point out a few things when we talk about this, and David pointed me. He said, first of all, the measurement of the sound, and I think we talked about this, Chief, is that if you get a complaint from a complainant, you go to their home, and then you measure it, according to this, it's at the boundary of their home. So on a commercial district, it says 70, but that could be some distance away where that's being measured. So what's coming out of the resort or the marina or any other establishment there could be well higher than that at the boundary of of the resort. So it's something that he pointed out to me, I think that's very important. He also pointed out to me the fact that decibels, every doubling of distance decreases the decibel level by 6 dB. So even if you were taking it at the fence of, say, the resort, the level of noise coming from the middle of the resort would be in excess of 90 dB, which is pretty high for that area. So those are things that I considered, and where I currently am is, in consultation with him, is that I think 70 is a fairly reasonable number, and he's mentioned that after looking at a lot of the data, he feels like there's, there could be minutes where it exceeded that, but there's no prolonged data that he's looked at that suggested that it went above 70 from his data. So that's one thing. The second thing, or third thing, I don't know where I am with it, but is this business district in GC 2. And I think the levels that we have in there, and I think we're trying to accommodate something so that is almost unachievable with a decibel level. And what I've done is I've asked our attorney through Desiree to draft some language that replaces that. And let me just get it. The language, I think, that replacing C3 for our GC2, which is our our main commercial district of the island, would be that in the GC2 general commercial zoning district, excessive noise is prohibited during the daytime hours of 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Friday and Saturday. In determining whether a sound constitutes excessive noise, reference to section 2 or D2 should be used. And D2, so there's a definition of excessive noise. D2 goes into what determines excessive noise. And so that would replace any kind of a decibel level for the GC2 district, which again is our main commercial district of the island. And then I guess the last thing, and then I'll open it up to all everybody's comments, is that on the penalty section in here, which is the 5 repeated violations, that was really intended for, I think, as short-term rentals when we are looking at a short-term rental revising that into these major and minor classifications, 5 fund-founded complaints, so the minors may constitute more than that, but we're re-looking at all that. And in talking to the chief suggested that maybe a more reasonable suggestion or remedy for commercial establishments would be 3 convicted violations. That's a higher standard, a higher bar, convicted standard versus a founded complaint. And so I would like to see that remove this section and replace with 3 convicted violations for commercial establishments, and then have a separate section in our code that deals with short-term rentals and the 5 unfounded complaints.
I have a question, Chair, if I may. The 3 convicted violations would be specific to noise? Or if a commercial establishment is convicted of a different type of violation?
Yeah. I don't know if I given it that much thought. I was specifically referencing it to noise, but, if there's
I think we
others,
just,
yeah.
food for thought,
Yeah,
it's something that we would want to
yeah,
clarify. If
yeah.
it's just noise, if it would be a noise-related violation and included in the noise section of the code, or would that be the equivalent of any type of violation once you determine that a business is a nuisance?
Yeah.
It's a question for Mac. Yeah.
Well, it's a question for the committee. Is
Yeah.
the committee does the committee want to have a threshold of noise, convicted noise violations would be enough to trigger the revocation process? Or if that number, in order to include any other type of violation, should be 5?
Yeah, I think that's something that we can consider. I think that 3 noise is what I was talking on. And that, and violations are, they're given a ticket, they go to court, they're convicted of it. But, and I guess the last thing is that, one of the things the chief suggested even, I think, is that maybe we make this a 6-month or so kind of ordinance, and then take a look at it at the end of 6 months, because there's and see how how we went through the season, how it went, is there's changes or anything that needed to be modified in it. So with that, I'll open it up to committee for thoughts and comments and where we should go.
Chair, would you like for us to provide feedback from the quarterly business meeting we held at the Public Safety Building?
Yeah, that would be great,
Yeah, so on the 16th of February, we held a meeting. We had over 45 people attend, very well represented from different businesses around the island. So we were very happy with the turnout. Overall, and we talked about multiple things, but the main topic that pretty much took over the entire hour was the noise ordinance. And generally, I think there are concerns, and Chief, please chime in if I miss anything. The general concern is that the decibel limits across the board are too low and may be unrealistic for the kind of activity that we already see here during the daytime, particularly. Just concerns about ambient noise being already potentially trigger the current noise decibels as they're drafted in the ordinance. There were concerns, particularly down at Front Beach, about where the noise is going to be measured. And the example that was given is the condominiums that are next to the Windjammer or next to some of these other commercial establishments. If they, they're immediately adjacent to this property, if they call where they complained, chances are, because they are outside and immediately adjacent to the business location, that the decibel threshold would be met pretty easily, potentially. So we talked about that being a concern, and then just concerns about just people who may have a vendetta, or just would like to see a commercial establishment being shut down, and generating multiple calls, multiple complaints, and just with ambient noise or just regular activity being, meeting that threshold, that decibel, and therefore just initiating potentially the business license revocation process. So did I miss anything? It's mostly
I think you
decibel.
nailed it. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Okay. I'm still a bit confused, and I want to make sure that I've got it right. Measurement is, if it's a residence that complains, then you go to the residence location and measure on their property somewhere. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, ma'am. We would go to the property line of the location where the complainant resides, unless they don't want us to. And if they don't, then we would go to the nearest public right-of-way that we have access to, and we would make the measurement there.
Okay, on it. And which decibel level controls? The residential level that we set or the commercial level that we set?
It would be the location that's making the noise would be held to the standard that we are giving them. So if it is a business, then they would be held to that standard, even if the complainant is in a residential area.
Okay. So that pretty much assumes that we're going to be outside doing the measurement too, doesn't it? We're not inside a person's residence.
Correct. It's at, and so we would typically be outside for that.
Okay.
Unless if they made a specific request for us to come inside and measure it, we would certainly do that for them as well.
Okay, but it's always, with this, the biggest problem is where commercial and residential abut each other. The commercial level that we set is the one that controls.
Correct.
Okay, that's good. All right. I think that the latest, especially the commercial area, decibel level of 75 decibels, 70 decibels is a bit low. I've looked at other areas. Charlotte has a 75 decibel level in their commercial areas, and that seems to be it's common. 70 or 75 seems to be common for commercial areas. In an effort to sort of find out what is best for our community, though, I would think we would start by setting it at the higher level, see how it works, and then if we need to, if there's still complaints and it's not working, lower it then, but not until we get to the lower level. So I would like the 75 decibel level for the commercial area. For the penalties, I think we need to be very careful and write something that specifically has one for, and I think we'd have to use the word, Matt could get this right, our lawyer, for residential uses, not residential zoning, because on Wild Dunes, you've got residential uses within that PUD that are not, it's a different kind of zoning. So for residential uses, I think we can leave it as it is now with 5 valid complaints that we have. If we want to leave it at that, I don't know whether we want to change it or not, but start with that, I guess. For commercial uses, which they may be in their own districts, except for the Wild Dunes area that does have commercial uses in their PDD. We would have a different standard. And after listening to John's explanation to me, I think that makes a lot of sense because, first of all, you have to have complaints. They have to be validated. They have to be valid enough for a violation to be written. And then that has to go to court and actually have convictions, which was the problem with the original ordinance, in that no one was getting convicted of a noise violation, so that it really wasn't going anywhere. I just want to make sure that we do have some recourse and that businesses don't feel like they can do whatever they please and not have to worry about repercussions, I guess is the word. So would that give us enough strength to actually change behavior on the island if we did that? If we did for the commercial areas? Where needed. Not everybody needs to change. I think most of our island is already in compliance, which is one of the things that I like.
Was that a question to the chief or?
Yeah. I think it's to the
I
chief.
believe, yes, I believe it will increase our enforcement capabilities if we have something that is less subjective. So that in itself is going to, I think, change behavior. And then if it is set at 3 convictions for a business license, it certainly does. I mean, when you put something like that on it, it grabs somebody's attention for sure. It's just, it's up to the council to determine if that's the message that you want to send or not. It's,
Okay. And so I guess the number of violations, how much, I think the penalty that works best with commercial establishments is fining them for it. They're in business to make money, and if we're not letting them make money, then I think that's the issue that we're looking at. So I want to make sure that we get compliance, so that if you go and you visit an establishment and the music's too loud, let's say, if the music is turned down, then there would be no violation, right?
you mean if we arrive and the music is already turned down before we get there?
Or you get there and you ask that it be, the remedy would be turn down the music or we'll issue a citation.
That would kind of be up to the officer. Regardless, we're going to make sure they turn it down, but whether they write a ticket or not is the discretion of the officer. And it could be a warning, it could be a ticket, but they'll take into account, how often do we get these calls for this place? How compliant were we when they got there? Was it, somebody that's more defiant is probably more likely to get a ticket as opposed to somebody who says, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I didn't realize, I totally see that we're in the wrong. They'll get, they're more likely to not have a citation.
And that ticket would be up to $500, is that our limit, I think, right?
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
correct.
Okay. And if the fine were paid, then there would be, it doesn't go to court, so there's no conviction, is that right?
If a paid citation would be considered a conviction.
Oh, it would be, okay,
Yes, because when you pay it, you're essentially pleading guilty
Guilty.
to the charge.
okay. All right. So I think I'd like to try it. And the next comment I have, and this is my last one, is with the ordinance. John, you were talking about a 6 months trial period. And I would suggest to make it easy for the community to try to do this on a trial basis is not issue any citations for transgressions over the next 6 months and see how many. I mean, I'm not sure how we do this with legally, but not try it out without causing penalties if we're going to change it later on. You know, we don't know until we try.
I guess my only concern I would have with that is if there's no penalty associated with it, then I don't think you have a true measurement of how successful the ordinance is at the end. You know, if everybody knows that for the next 6 months, it doesn't matter, we're just gathering data, then, you know, we don't know that that's the true behavior, if that makes sense.
I think what we can take into consideration during that 6-month period is whether or not the number of violations would trigger the revocation process. Maybe we take a step back.
Okay.
If we have somebody that gets
Good,
enough
yeah.
violations, we can say, you know, they've been
Okay,
pursued by the police department. They get a penalty, but it may not trigger us revoking their license if
It
that's
still would come to council for the
Correct.
revocation, so.
correct.
yeah.
Jimmy, you got any comments?
Couple of questions. So you get a complaint that people are talking too loud in a establishment that has a patio, and it sees 75 decibels. They come and measure it from the property line. Does that generate a ticket?
Again, it's up to the officer that responds, and it's gonna be typically, is it a place that we commonly get these calls for? Is it a place where we commonly see violations?
So it's
Not necessarily
it is
number
a
of
little
calls.
subjective and, right?
There's always gonna be discretion in police work, with the exception of certain types of felonious activity. Police officers are gonna have some discretion.
Well, I think the discretion would come into play whether they issue a citation or warning or not. But if we change the ordinance and we establish that the limit is 75, and in that example, the noise does exceed 75, it would be documented as an incident that violated the ordinance. Whether or not the officer issues a warning, ticket, or verbal warning, that's a different instance. But in your case, I would think, yes, it violates the code because it exceeds that
Those people are talking
maximum
too-
decibel
People are
level.
talking too loud.
Yeah, well, whatever it's generating the noise, I think if we go from a subjective ordinance to objective and having those thresholds, then that's really what they're looking at. Does it exceed that number or not?
Okay. Okay, so I'm at my house, and I don't rent it out, don't have a short-term rental license, but I got a really fantastic stereo, and I like to play it, and it exceeds the noise violation. So is there going to be a cutoff to where I'm hauled before council, and what are you going to take away from me?
No, sir, we wouldn't have the ability to take a homeowner in front of council for any purposes.
Right.
What would happen is we would
I
continue to
figured.
cite, and, you know, the court system in itself, when they see repeat offenders, tend to take a different stance each time they see somebody over and over again. But that would be our only recourse, is citations,
Citations?
or,
Okay.
based on the ordinance.
But a
it could
business
be-
owner or a short-term rental owner has got this potential for losing their business license or using their short-term rental license simply because of the structure they exist. Whereas I, as a private property owner, I wouldn't have to worry about that, the way it's being proposed. So, is city-sponsored events, are they included in this noise ordinance or not?
I believe they're included in the exemptions.
Why would they be included in the exemption?
I think that's similar to the way it is today. If an event is approved that's a city sponsored, they're exempt from the noise ordinance than today. It's just that it's a more subjective application of those
Do we still have the part in here where anyone can apply for a special permit
Yeah,
for any event that exceeds the
Yeah,
noise
that's-
ordinance?
yes, it's in.
And
That's
so
on
the
page 8.
city just applies to itself to exceed the noise ordinance, I think is what
So
would
the
happen.
city approves themselves
Yeah,
to be exempt.
yeah.
So,
don't
Yeah, section G lists, I think there's seven exemptions.
G7 is where you can, a commercial property or business owner may apply to the city council for an exception.
Yeah.
so the city would be exempt. It's kind of like years ago, is to roll out carts, trash carts, recycling carts, where the city was exempt. And some people had questions about that, to where they had just gotten a ticket and they would go, like, on some city-owned property, for instance, the rec department, and there'd be roll-out trash cans in plain view everywhere. You kind of people ask questions about that. And I'm just, I have questions about holding people that are just residents and people that happen maybe to live here, have a residence, but they also have a business where they are served to, they are subject to different standards. You know, to where if I'm a business and somebody has a vendetta against me for whatever reason, and they have found a complaint where, or whatever it is, where it's 3 or 5 or 20 or 1, and they get hauled before city council and could lose their livelihood because of a different standards being set for them than their neighbor. So I have a problem with all of that, and I don't understand if I understood Councilmember Bogosian's opening statement. I think it said something about exempting the daytime hours in the GC2 from till, I think, 10, correct me if I'm wrong, 10 p.m. in the weekdays and 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're asking about what my proposal was?
Correct.
Yeah, currently, it says those same hours that you just mentioned, the current ordinance says it if it exceeds 85 decibels.
Yeah.
And what I'm suggesting is take out the 85 decibels and just say as long as they don't exceed the definition of excessive noise.
I think that's a good idea, but I also think in my humble opinion, it sets us back to square one, to where we started with all this a couple of years ago is still very subjective.
It is.
I mean, it's easy to sit back when somebody does the work and criticize, and I'm not doing that. I'm just pointing out questions that I have. Appreciate the hard work. It took the time to put all that together. Whether I agree with it, the things that I've said, I just see inconsistencies that where people would say, well, I live next to a party house, and they don't have short-term rental. They live here, and they have swimming pool, and they got kids screaming in all hours of the day and night, and they're not subject to the same penalties as somebody just simply because they have a short-term rental license or simply because they have a business license. And those are my concerns.
So I guess are you asking that we increase the enforcement to those continued violators of residents? Or are you asking for us to lessen the penalty for commercials? To make them, you want to make them.
It's all brand new to me. I really have to think about it, sir, but I'm going through everything. Like I said, this is the first time I'm hearing all of this. And so I'd really have to study it, but I'm just made observations, and I don't have a recommendation at this point until I have time to see the proposals and work on them.
I think one thing that might help is an incident that happened last year, I think. There was a resident who got in touch with me and complained. They were not a short-term rental, they were a homeowner, and it was actually a grandmother who was letting her teenager's grandson stay at the house while she was on a trip. And they decided to have a high school graduation party there. So there was a complaint because the kids had their own band, and the band came over to practice 2 or 3 days before the event, or the weekend before, I think it was. And there was a complaint because of the noise, the loud music. And our officers went to the scene and wrote a warning, told them you couldn't do that in a residential area, and asked them to stop. But it was a warning. Well, the next weekend, they had the party, and guess what? Band showed up too, and they went through the whole routine all over again. The penalty was the resident was cited a violation, and it was a $500 fine for it, which is what we have in this ordinance as well. It's still in there, plus court costs. So by the time the grandmother was back in town and complaining to me about these were nice kids and everything, but she didn't want to pay $1,000. She didn't have a license to lose, but the financial burden is enough, I think, to keep most residents in line. I may be wrong about that. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that is a substantial penalty for someone for a violation.
I do want to add that I think we need to discuss a little bit more I think to the point that Councilmember Ward said, I have concerns about having the standard for essentially brick and mortar businesses, for their standard to be convictions. If we recognize, that is an important process for them to go through before a business license is pulled, I'm not sure if it would be appropriate to keep the STR license, the process for revoking a short-term rental business license at founded complaints. Okay. And that may just create, for the city to defend pursuing those processes, as it might not be beneficial for us to acknowledge the importance of the conviction and the due process in one instance and have a much more lenient, I guess, process for short-term rental business licenses, because we do have properties that are rented year-round that generate a lot of revenue, maybe even comparable to one of our brick and mortar businesses. So it's, I guess, the same. It's as important as it is for a restaurant or, a commercial establishment to keep their license. The same I would think would apply to some of these properties that are, essentially business operations as well. So that may be something we want to think through a little bit more.
Or could we deal with short-term rental violations, noise violations, under the short-term rental ordinance?
That's, I think, how it is today, but it's founded complaints.
And the short-term rental I need to be refreshed about this. They're in the licensing part of our ordinance now. So the short-term rental licenses are the same as any other business license? Is that the way it works?
Correct.
Okay, so that
The
probably wouldn't work.
the trigger for a business license revocation is the same, whether it's a short-term rental or a business.
And that right now is what?
5 founded
founded
complaints.
Complaints
Yeah.
of any sort.
Yes, ma'am. And that's what we're going to be working on and identifying exactly what those violations would be that would trigger, because right now it's fully open. It's any violation. And we had this conversation about the trash,
Yeah.
the garbage cans.
Yeah.
Receiving a citation is our intention that would count towards what would trigger somebody's license being revoked.
Well, one of the things we could do in the spirit of trying to get this noise ordinance out is we can eliminate I, right, which is the penalty section here of around revocation of licenses, and deal with that with the separate ordinance that we're working on, the license ordinance. So whatever we come up with there would apply to this. If it's a violation, it's a violation that would apply to that, but we don't
Correct.
have to reference that in this ordinance.
Except how do we deal with private homes?
Well, that doesn't
violations.
deal with private homes anyway. There's still a violation of $500 fine, but what I'm saying is there's no, take out of this ordinance, this section that deals with the revocation of business licenses.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so if you come to my house because we're too loud and you give me a violation, then I pay the fine just as a private private homeowner. But if you go to a short-term rental area, they get a violation, they get the noise violation, and then it could be considered as a license violation as well.
Correct. If it stays as it is today, it would be a founded violation. If it changes to conviction, it would have to go through the process before it's counted as a strike against that property.
But it's on our slate to work on that ordinance and
Correct.
change it. So we'll have to get to that here relatively quick as well, but it wouldn't be included into this noise ordinance.
I think that cleans this up, yeah. I think that takes care of one of the issues.
Well, I'm looking at it, the underlying question, and also foremost in my mind is, what problem are we trying to fix?
Livability
And
on the island. Yeah. Usually the noise is too what can trigger all,
how many
Revelations
noise
going.
complaints we had in GC2 in like the last year?
I don't know off the top of my head, sir, but it's not a lot.
Right.
We actually do not get a lot of noise complaints in general.
Correct.
But Chief, remind me, when we first started discussing this 2-3 years ago now, it was due in part by a resident of the condominiums on Front Beach that I guess may have not realized they were purchasing next to the Windjammer.
Correct, and I
Am I
believe
correct?
they reached out to you specific, they weren't necessarily calling us. But yes, we did have one resident that was, and we'll get a couple, I'm not saying we don't get any. We do get a couple here and there that will complain about a couple of the businesses on the Front Beach area. So it's a couple, it's not a lot though.
Is it always about music? Or is it like just noise?
Most of the time it's music, but I'm pretty sure we've had a couple that were maybe some loud voices and loud talking.
Talking, yeah.
Yes, sir.
I guess to me, the reason we have three is there's three distinct zoning areas we're talking about here, right? We're talking about residential zoning in one. We're talking about commercial areas that have different zoning than Front Beach. Front Beach has GC2 as a separate zoning district, and I think that's why we're kind of classify these out in different ways.
Well, you
And
know,
then we've
there's
got the
One
PDD.
property that I know of, GC3. That's not, I haven't heard that yet, but I'll have to read the ordinance.
Yeah.
But the GC3, I'm pretty sure is Acme. It's the only property on the island.
I think that would fall under this, would that fall? I don't know,
well,
where
it's
would that fall?
GC2 is what we're calling it in this.
Commercial property.
Yeah, on the second one, the commercial property area.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
But that's why I think, in my mind, why we have different standards for different areas, because they're distinct zoning areas. And so Front Beach is clearly different than, at least in my mind, and in zoning's mind, than what, a commercial district at, at the resort or the marina or some other area where the Harris Teeters and the strip shops, and those are much different to my mind than what our Front Beach area is. And of course, our residential areas are something totally separate and distinct.
Just like to make one final comment, if I may, and I'm pretty sure last 15 years, this has only come before council once in a long, long time. And it was before the chief's time. I can't remember if that was a noise violation or not. But they had some problems, and they did lose their license for a year, a short-term rental.
That's short-term, okay.
It was only one, and the council voted on it, and it was unanimous.
So I guess the question is, where do we go from here? From a procedural standpoint, we can have a first reading of an ordinance in April, or March rather, and then we can still modify and change the ordinance for the second reading for the second reading.
Yes, sir.
I'm curious everybody's thought, but as a recommendation to start with, I would like to see us get this thing kind of cleaned up to what we discussed maybe, and then and then we can take it as a first reading. And then in April, I would like to entertain David Cohen at the meeting and try to see if we should take forward to a workshop in April to full council what the final should be, and then have a second reading in April. Is that a realistic path that we could take?
Certainly realistic and possible. You all could make a recommendation to council this month to be presented as in the form of a first reading. If council adopts it, then we have a month.
To
before-
finalize numbers,
to
decibel
finalize.
levels, and different things that we have.
And then the committee can make recommendations for amendments to council when it's scheduled for second reading. And if at that time council is not ready, you can defer that to the next month before you adopt it.
Yeah. Does that sound like something we could do?
I'd have to study it before I could vote for it.
Would you
For
like
the
to,
first reading? Yeah.
would you like to see the version, the latest version, or would you like to consider amending it to include the exemption to GC2? And just
I would like
reference,
to see the exemption to GC2 and take out that last piece on the on the revocation of the licenses. And then,
I'd like to see the,
and then see if we can't just put it forward and then finalize whatever we can at the, and then get David Cohen, we continue to talk about it, we study it, and be able to, then, before we vote on a second reading of it, there's a lot of time and to change things.
and I'd like to see the commercial area maximum decibel level raised to back to 75 decibels.
Well, see, there's a disparity I'm not sure of, and I'd like to have that clarified if possible. I understand that decibel levels wouldn't be used in daytime hours under your proposal, is that correct or not?
In GC2.
Right.
Right.
But she's saying she wants it to,
But she's saying there's a second level that's for the commercial areas other than GC2.
I
for
see.
Like the hotel,
I see.
the marina,
Okay.
those other areas.
Boathouse.
They would have.
appreciate you bearing with me, please explain me your position on the violations again? On the violation section?
The violation section, I would, I still think it should be a $500 fine for a violation, but it would not reference any revocation of business license in this. We would take that out of it.
Okay.
Okay. And then we could just leave it like that for 6 months because we're not jeopardizing any kind of business license with this.
Well,
Well, I still think we need to go work on that business license revocation
Yeah.
section that we started last meeting.
you could call it 6 months if you'd like, but council could overturn it in 20 minutes.
Yeah. But 6 months will get us through one season, summer season, so we'd see how well it works. And if it's causing total chaos, then we back off.
So is that, do you guys generally agree that we should do that? Jan?
Yeah, with those,
Yeah,
with,
I like the portion of the part about the violation, penalties being, getting rid of their business license, or they're losing, their business license is gone, in the way I understand it. To your proposal, is that correct?
Yeah.
Well,
Out of here. It's out of this
Yeah.
ordinance, the old ordinance. There's still an ordinance on the books on business licenses that says 5 founded complaints. Until we change that, that would still be the.
But it's
law.
not in the noise
But it's
ordinance.
not in the noise
It
ordinance.
won't be in the
Yeah.
noise ordinance,
Right.
okay?
yeah, it won't be in the noise one, but it would still apply to any business.
Right.
Yes.
Because there's still, that's still section 7(1)(15)E or whatever that is, ordinance. And so until we change that, that would still apply.
So what we'll do, if that's okay with the committee, we'll make these changes and then present it for discussion to council at the workshop before it's on the agenda at the end of the month for an actual first reading. And that way we can discuss some of these changes with the full body before.
Okay?
So losing the license, is that for all businesses or just GC2?
All businesses, yeah. Anybody that has a business license, they would risk losing their business license at currently, the way it reads is 5 founded complaints.
Correct.
And so until we change that ordinance, and we have to do that in a separate.
But it's not in the noise
But
ordinance.
it's not in the noise ordinance. Something's in addition to that's not in the
So we
noise
got rid
ordinance.
of that. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear. We've removed it from the noise ordinance, but the noise ordinance will still be applied under the business license
Yeah.
ordinance.
It would be a
and that
founded complaint
revocation-
under the noise,
Correct.
but until we change the business license section, I mean, we can't do anything about that. But we
Correct.
will not reference that in this noise ordinance.
Will the business license come before this committee for discussion?
Yeah, yeah. I think we started that last meeting where we talked about major complaints and minor complaints, and we started down that path, but we got a lot more work, I think, to do before we get to any solution with it. But yeah, we should work on that pretty quick.
Agreed.
Yeah. So put that on the agenda for our next meeting.
Well,
right.
compromise.
All right,
Right.
so you'll have Mac draft that then, Desiree, and send it back out to us, and we can, and bring it at the council.
Yes, sir.
That's a good solution. Thank you.
So the next item is to review the police and fire department's FY '25 budget.
You thought this past discussion was lively. What do you see what Deborah's got to tell us?
Well, it's not gonna be that bad. All right, so we'll start with the police department. Generally, the increases to our operational expenses are, as you may expect, mainly due to payroll. Remember, we added 10 personnel last year. 6 of them were paramedics, 1 of them were a code enforcement. So you're gonna see in salaries and wages the impact of those additions to our personnel, and also the increases to wages that we implemented this year, and that being forecasted for other years. Another big increase that you'll see as we review the budget is it's due to health insurance increasing. We are seeing an 11.8 increase this year, and that does not include our experience modifier, which we won't know until the end of this month.
Is that for '25 calendar year '25?
Correct.
So it's only half of this budget, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It would impact half of our
Okay.
6 months out of our budget. So,
Experience modifier?
yeah, so that
That
is.
sounds expensive.
So last year, it was 3.8, and it's really mainly due to the claims that we've had.
I see.
So we'll know the end of this year whether it's lower or higher than we saw last year. So the budget, as you see it today, only includes the 11.8 increase that we got directly from PIBA, and that pretty much applies to everybody across the board.
Can I ask a question on salaries and wages, though?
Yes, sir.
Typically on the police, at least, I think fire as well, we allow for open positions.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what we've done here too? In other words, we took, like if we had a head count of 23 officers, we say we're always gonna, say we're gonna have 2 head count openings, so we don't budget for 2.
I think we have budgeted in the past for the police department, we budgeted 95% of staffing. I think it was 100,
This 100%?
I believe so, right, Deborah?
Not in the police department, it is 95%, but I think in fire, I have to double check, but I think it is 100%.
Okay.
Hopefully, we don't have vacancies.
I'd just like to know from year to year if it's changed or not.
Right.
That's
And I think
primarily
there
what
are
I
only
want to know.
3 current openings in fire, right? 3 paramedics. Correct.
Yeah, but I can show you what we've done in the past in terms of, but I
I want to know if
last
it's
year-
apples to apples or
Correct.
something different we're doing this year.
Right, no, it's
Yeah.
apples to apples.
So it would be 95% for police, but everybody else we're counting for 100%. The other increase that we have throughout the budget is related to our insurance, just general liability and property liability. You know, as you can expect, you know, when we increase in payroll, that has a correlating increase in our insurance rate, in insurance premium rates. Our property values have increased as we make improvements to buildings. As we buy new equipment, the values are higher. So we're seeing an overall 25% increase in insurance. Deborah and I are working with SMRF, the Municipal Association, and having them evaluate our coverage rates and whether or not there's an opportunity to just making sure that we're properly insured, and if there are some things that it would be better for us to self-insure, just making that comparison, and whether or not we can increase our deductible, and how, you know, what are options that would bring, and how that could lower our premium rate. So we're in the process of doing that evaluation, but overall, I think across the board, we're just seeing insurance high.
Have you done any work at looking at the historical data on this, the claims in the past, like maybe the last 5, 7, 10 years?
Yeah.
How many claims do we actually have filed? I know that's why you have insurance, because for unexpected costs, but have
Yeah.
you thought about that?
We will be doing that this year. We did that a few years ago when we moved from a deductible of $2,000 to $5,000 because of the number of claims. It was pretty low. We have had in the past couple of years a higher number of claims, but we can run that report as well. So I think just generally, those are three big pieces that are driving a lot of the increases in expenditure. So I'll just go through and highlight the additions to this year's operational budget for both police and fire, and then just stop me on the way if you have any specific questions. So under the general fund for police, first item I wanted to highlight was under the IT equipment, software, and services line item. That's 24. That's a 2,900 increase from prior year, and that's due to us having to cover the software that we use with the county for the emergency operations center. The county was covering that expense, and because of increases in the cost, they're now asking all municipalities to cover their share. So it's 2,500, an annual expense that would cover police, fire, and every other department for the city. And that's what we use during emergencies to communicate with the county. Under uniforms, line 28, there's a $6,000 increase, and that is a request that's been made by the police department for them to update their badge. So that would be a one-time expense. Insurance, we talked about that. Employee training, there's a 2,500 increase addition, and that's to cover field training software. Right now, our police department is using a paper tracking system, essentially, which sometimes could lend to errors or omissions, and that's just something that they would like to kind of bring into 2024 by having that as a web-based program. And then under canine kennel expenses, there's a $2,500 provision to support our canine program, food, veterinary visits, and other supplies.
That's not pound expense, that's just Sandy.
It's just Sandy. Yes, sir.
She eats a lot.
So I'll move on to general fund, BSO wages and fringes. You'll see this across the budget. Now that we've outsourced parking management, a lot of the expenses associated with that operation are going away, and they're now being covered by the revenues from parking as part of that arrangement. But our goal is to keep 3 BSOs to help support the police department in enforcing ordinances on the beach. Actually serve, help missing children, fill holes on the beach, help tag equipment and materials that are left overnight, help enforce, or not help, but enforce our smoking ban, plastic ban, and just serve as a sort of eyes and ears for the police department on the beach at all times.
I noticed yesterday somebody gave me a little red slip of paper from the new parking management company. And it said, warning, parking violation. And there was no fine or anything. I guess they're trying to let everybody know we're having parking,
Yes, sir.
paid parking again.
That's correct. And the new parking management company started March 1st, which is the beginning of our parking season. And they are issuing warnings for the first couple weeks, just
Right,
to,
you're right. So, not to get off track, but when will we talk about revenues? At another session, or this is
at
just,
the budget workshop.
okay,
Yes, sir.
so that's my ideas there.
Okay, good. I'll take all of them I can get.
I guess to follow up on that, where do we show the expense of hiring that parking management group? Is it,
So the arrangement, so they get 24% of all revenues. The city gets 76% of all parking-related revenues, including citations. The company takes 24%, and of that 24%, all operational expenses are covered.
so in our budget, we only show the revenue for our 75%. We never show what the fee is that we're paying them.
Correct, because it's offset by the operational expense.
Okay.
But you'll see
That's
a lot of savings in our expenditure budget that we're not covering, that will be covered by that arrangement. So BSOs, again, like I said, we're anticipating hiring 3 BSOs. Under the capital projects fund, under capital outlay, you can see we've included $55,000 for one of the 3 patrol vehicles that need replacement in FY '25. And half of the cost of the upgrade to the access control system that we're anticipating doing at the public safety building and at the fire station 2 as well. Under the municipal accommodations tax, we included under contracted services, this is something I wanted to highlight, the hourly fee for the Charleston County deputy that we hire every weekend during the season to help support our police department has increased 38%. So their hourly rate went from 45, I believe, or 47 to now 65.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a significant increase. And there is one officer that for the past 2 years, we have been covering half of it and sharing that cost with the county parks, and they've indicated that they will continue to do that, but that's an additional to the ones that we typically hire to help traffic enforcement as well.
And how many do we hire?
Well, we attempt to get 2 every weekend, and that's, it's a volunteer model where people sign up from off-duty deputies sign up. Sometimes we can fill them, sometimes we don't. So it depends. We did receive last year, as part of our efforts at increased coordination and partnership with our neighbors and with the county particularly, we received a $25,000 contribution from the county to help offset the cost of these deputies. We have requested whether the county will continue supporting the Barrier Island and the beach communities with this provision, and whether or not that should be increased to cover the increase in the rates that we're seeing this year. So we'll keep you updated. The mayor and I will be meeting with county council chairman and administrator in the next couple weeks. Under municipal accommodations tax, we've included the second of the SUV replacement at $55,000. And really everything else stays the same or we're seeing decreases compared year over year. Under the hospitality tax, you'll see we have the 3rd vehicle replacement. So we're funding these 3 vehicles, one by capital projects, muni aid tax, and state aid tax. So that we've distributed a third, which is typical for.
Why isn't any of the wages coming out of those funds?
They are, they're just treated in the transfers in.
Okay, the transfer coming in.
Mhm, and
And we
we'll
talked
review
about
that.
increasing that, but.
Yes, and the model, that, the first draft that we're working on now will include the same level of transfers in as we've had, but we've increased it to cover the increase in wages. And we've increased it to include the short-term rental coordinator position, the one code enforcement officer, and 2 CDL drivers.
Okay.
So you'll see those transfers in going up to cover those 4 positions. Okay, under hospitality tax, we're using hospitality tax revenue to fund 1 vehicle replacement, 1 utility vehicle, so these are the vehicles that our BSOs will use on the beach, for $22,000, and that went up from our 10-year capital plan. Last year, it was $18,000. We've increased that to $22,000 based on actual cost. And then half of the cost of a new public safety drone. This is something that the police department has requested to upgrade their existing drone and have an accompanying software that would cost about $4,000 to $6,000 every year to maintain, but the initial cost of the drone will not, obviously, I think the useful life is what, 3 years, Chief, for the drone?
3 to 5, yes, ma'am.
Okay. So that's an addition that you saw in the 10-year capital plan, and we're funding that with a combination of hospitality tax, and you'll see the other half under state accommodations tax. The state accommodations tax also is funding the half of the improvements and enhancements to IT in our public safety building training room. As you know, that is the location we use as our municipal emergency operations center. And there's just some improvements, I won't go into every detail, but just improvements that will enhance the use of that facility during emergencies. We're covering that with state accommodations tax. Under capital outlay, there's the second utility vehicle for the beach at $22,000. That's where we have half of the cost of the new drone. We are requesting $18,000. This is another addition to replace our tasers. So, Chief, maybe you'll need to help me explain that a little bit, but our current tasers are no longer supported. We have to go through a new model. It's now more of a sort of a subscription-based model where we pay an amount every 5 years. It includes training, replacement of cartridges, et cetera, but it's just gonna be an ongoing expense. And if we need to replace them, they go missing, then it'll be covered by that subscription.
All of them at one time, is that what you?
That's correct. So the systems that we currently use, the platforms that we use, are end of support, some of them, which means that we're no longer covered in any capacity. TASER offers an opportunity, if you use their system and it results in significant injury or death, they will send lawyers to support you. However, if we don't switch platforms, that will not be an option for us. And that is such an important part of it. And I won't bore you with everything, but the technology that goes with it is better at life-saving capabilities than what the original TASER was. So.
Okay.
And then the final piece, for the police department, it would be under the state aid tax, and that's the half of the police department's share for the access control upgrades to the building at $31,000. Any questions for the police department?
No.
All right, for the fire department, same expenditure adjustments when we're looking at salaries, wages, health insurance, retirement expense. So you'll see that increase compared to budget at 13%.
Do we have all the paramedics?
We do not. We are in the process of hiring 3. Applications are on hand, and they're going through the interview
No,
process.
but they're in the budget, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
the budget assumes full staffed on the paramedic program. And I think it may be a good time for the chief to give us an update on the, chief on the paramedic program and the 3 folks that we have on hand and how they're functioning in their capacity as paramedics.
Sure. So our intent is, and is stated, it hasn't changed, June, we hope to go live with our paramedic program.
And that's consistent with the timeline we discussed with the committee and council last year.
That's correct, yeah, that has not changed. So we're looking good there. We're working with DHEC on our licensure. We have our medical control physician that is going to hopefully be under contract here later this week. We have the contract for him to sign. And then, of course, we have Dr. Carr with MUSC, who's still on board. So our medical control staff is in place. And then we are interviewing 1 firefighter paramedic on Friday. So we have our equipment that we have spec'd out. Some has arrived, some of the equipment has already arrived, some arrived today, some arrived last week. Our cardiac monitors, for example, arrived today. As I was walking over here, our training module for the cardiac monitor arrived last week. And so our other equipment, our medical bags and other equipment, they had a narcotics meeting, or controlled medications meeting earlier this morning with our 3 firefighter paramedics. They're working on that, making sure that the medications that we receive are packaged in a way where it's, ease of delivery. So we've been working on that steadily with our training chief. He is a paramedic, and so he's organized the training. We've been doing our continuing education. Our medical control physician, Dr. Sorrell, he has been there at every training that we've had so far, and our paramedics have really gained a lot of knowledge and confidence through that because they're hearing from a physician. It's also raising the level of performance and standard and expectation for our EMT basics and our EMRs. So they're also getting that knowledge so they know how to assist the paramedic. They may not know exactly what's going on with the cardiac rhythm, but they'll be able to say, hey, this is something that you need to definitely look at. And, they can make that recommendation to the paramedic as they're multitasking. So that's moving along. Again, sometime in June, we hope to be fully operational.
Fantastic. That's great news.
And the expense of this, the new physician that is overseeing this program, we are covering their insurance as well as a monthly contribution. We included that in in FY24 budget, so they're on board, and we'll continue that. That's included in the insurance and the wages expense as well.
When you say insurance, malpractice insurance or what?
It's an additional,
Insurance,
yes.
yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
They're covered because they work for us, they're covered under our general liability, but there's just some circumstances that would not be covered by that, then they need additional insurance. So not too many big changes in the general fund, so I'll just go over to the capital projects fund, maintenance and service contracts. FY25 includes, this is the annual provision for building maintenance, but that has been increased by $64,000 to cover the repairs to the elevator at Fire Station 2. We also included under capital outlay what we had we saw this last month in our 10-year capital plan. 5% of the cost of replacing the jaws of life equipment. We're pursuing a grant. It's a 5% grant, so we're just including the expenditure of what would be our local share at $6,000. Equipment for accident extrications at $10,000. Here's the fire department's half of the access control system for the public safety building at $31,250. And the addition of 2 portable deck guns at $9,000. Under the municipal accommodations tax, here's where we've included 1/3 of the local share for the rescue boat. As you know, we're pursuing a port security grant for the purchase of a new rescue boat. The cost of that boat is around $1 million. It's a 75-25, so we've included the expense of that 25% local share between our tourism funds. I have approached the Charleston County Administrator and requested assistance for to cover a portion of that local share, recognizing that our fire department responds to calls involving unincorporated areas of Charleston County. So I've initiated those discussions with the
So
county.
our local share is 100% funded by tourism funds. But the 25%,
yes, sir.
25 to 25%
Yes,
would
sir.
be, and that's all funded by tourism funds.
That is how the first draft of the budget is.
But you only have 100 in there, right now?
Well, yeah, so you'll see under hospitality tax,
Oh, okay.
the other third.
Okay, got
And
it.
then under state accommodations tax, the other third.
They're all, it's all tourism funds.
Yes, sir. Under the municipal accommodations tax fund, in addition to that local, a third of the local share for the new boat, we have the replacement of a jet ski. That's part of the regular rotation, and the cost for the access control system for Fire Station 2 at $65,000. Hospitality tax is helping cover the fire department share of the improvements to IT for the training room that we talked about earlier, for the room we use for our municipal emergency operations center, and also the replacement of one of the 2 ATVs for beach. It says beach patrol, but it's just responding to beach related calls for the fire department, and that's at $26,000. And there you can see we have the $100,000, which would be a third of the local share for the new boat. And then the last account is the state accommodations tax. Here we have their other half of the door access controls replacement for the public safety building, the other third of the rescue boat local share, and some training mannequins for $22,000. And that's all we have. Any questions?
So this we'll roll this up into the total budget and look at this on the 19th at the workshop, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we'll review our revenue projections. We'll look at the entire budget, how it's impacting our fund balance. We'll also discuss opportunities for increasing revenues. We'll evaluate our forecast for revenues for the next few years. And again, identify if there's any opportunities for us to cover what we just see just a lot of significant increases in the cost of operating. Just increased costs, personnel, payroll continues to increase, and that's just essentially the cost of keeping the lights on.
Yep. All right. Any comments on it?
A lot of opportunities in this year's budget. I don't call them problems.
They're not.
They're opportunities, right?
They're opportunities.
All right, under miscellaneous business, the next meeting date is 11 a.m. Tuesday, April 2nd. Being no further business, make a motion, we adjourn.
So move.